On a night when the storm showed no mercy, a little girl with snow in her hair and a newborn clutched tightly in her arms whispered at a stranger's door, "Please, just one night." What happened next was not just shelter from the cold. It was the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. In the silence of a mansion built to keep the world out, a man who had locked away his heart for years suddenly faced the very thing he feared most: human connection. This is not only a story about survival in the snow, but about doors that open when we least expect them, and the families we find when we believe we have none left. Stay with us, because this story will touch your heart in ways you never imagined. Subscribe now to Hidden Echo Stories so you never miss the next chapter. Morning light crept reluctantly across the tall windows of the mansion, silver and soft, but the air inside felt different. Graham stood in the kitchen, his movements uncertain, as though he were trespassing in his own life. He cracked eggs into a pan, placed toast in the old toaster, sliced an apple with hands that had forgotten what it was like to prepare food for someone other than himself. It was not gourmet, not impressive, but it was warm. He carried the plate into the dining room and set it down in front of Ellie, who sat with her shoulders hunched and her sleeves pulled down over her hands. Beside her, Macy dozed in the carrier, cheeks flushed from the night's rest. "Eat while it is warm," Graham said. His voice was quiet, awkward. Ellie looked at the plate, then picked up the fork without a word. She ate carefully, each bite deliberate, as though food was something to be rationed, never taken for granted. Graham watched in silence, sipping his coffee, wondering how a child had learned habits born of scarcity so young. It was Ellie who broke the silence, her voice almost threadbare. She spoke of her father, Kevin, who had seemed healthy and alive only days before a sudden heart attack took him. She described the indifference of Monica, the woman who should have been a guardian, yet saw them only as burdens. She told how she was given trash bags instead of care, how a door was slammed on her with words that cut deeper than the storm itself. Graham sat rigid, every muscle taut, anger simmering beneath his calm surface. Not at Ellie, not even entirely at Monica, but at the world that allowed such cruelty to go unanswered. He wanted to say something to ease her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he stood abruptly, forcing himself to steady his voice. "People like her do not get to win," he said, though it sounded more like a vow than a comfort. Ellie looked at him with cautious eyes, uncertain whether to believe, but for the first time she did not look away. As the hours passed, Graham found himself telling her pieces of his own story, fragments he had buried deep. He confessed to years of being shuffled between foster homes, shelters, and temporary walls where no one ever stayed long enough to care. He admitted to knowing the silence she carried, the quiet of a child who had learned not to ask for too much. Ellie listened, her eyes sharp, studying him not as a stranger but as someone who might understand. When he told her he had been adopted by a teacher who gave him a chance, who placed a computer in his hands and told him he was capable, she leaned forward slightly, as though clinging to the hope that one person really could change everything. Still, the fragile calm did not last. That night Macy burned with fever, her small body restless and hot against Ellie's chest. Panic filled the girl's eyes as she paced near the fire, whispering lullabies, pressing cool cloths to her sister's skin. Nothing worked. Graham read the thermometer and felt the weight of urgency press against his chest. He did not hesitate. "Get your shoes," he said firmly, already pulling on his coat. Ellie blinked at him in disbelief. "The roads," she began, but he cut her off. "I'm not risking her lungs overnight." They drove through the blizzard, the SUV straining against ice and snow while visibility collapsed to almost nothing. Ellie sat in the back seat, clutching Macy, whispering over and over, "It is going to be all right, baby. Please be all right." Graham's hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white, every muscle locked in determination. Nothing else mattered but reaching that hospital. When they arrived, the fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell of the emergency ward hit them like a wall. Nurses moved quickly at the sight of Macy, ushering them past intake. But then Ellie froze. Across the room stood two agents from Child Protective Services, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. Her breathing fractured into panic. "No," she whispered. "They will take her. They will split us up. Please do not let them." Graham did not hesitate. He stepped in front of her, shielding her from view, and spoke firmly to the nurse. "They are with me, both of them. I take full responsibility." His voice carried an authority that made the agents pause, but his hand, gently gripping Ellie's, told her something else. It told her he would not let go. Inside the exam room, Macy was diagnosed with an early lung infection, treatable but dangerous if ignored. Relief washed through Ellie in waves as she held her sister's tiny hand. Graham sat beside her, his voice low but steady. "You did good. She is safe." Ellie shook her head. "No, you brought us here." His reply was simple, but it settled into her like a promise. "We both did, together." Not long after, one of the CPS agents returned, their questions sharp but edged with weary compassion. Graham met each one with resolve, insisting he would file guardianship papers, refusing to let the sisters be separated. When the agent finally nodded in reluctant agreement, Graham returned to Ellie, knelt beside her, and asked the only question that mattered. "Do you trust me?" Her answer was hesitant, fragile. "I do not know, but I want to." He placed his hand over hers, steady and sure. "You are safe here, and I do not break promises." Days later, the house began to change. Not all at once, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. The silence no longer rang hollow. It filled with new sounds: Macy's soft hiccups, Ellie's quiet humming as she colored in a forgotten book, the shuffle of tiny hands against blankets. Graham noticed the details: a pacifier left beside his whiskey decanter, crayon marks smudged across marble countertops once pristine, a plastic rattle hidden between leather cushions. The fortress he had built for solitude was slowly becoming a home. One afternoon, Ellie placed a crayon drawing on the counter. 3 figures stood hand in hand in front of a house surrounded by snow. One tall in a gray coat, one small with pigtails, one tiny with a wide smile. Above them, in uneven red letters, the word home. Graham stared at it. Something breaking loose inside him, something he had not realized he had been holding. He folded the picture carefully and placed it on the mantel. That night, Ellie made a quiet joke. It was dry, almost too soft to hear, but it startled him. He laughed. It was not forced, not polite, it was real. The sound startled them both. "You all right?" she asked with a faint smile. He rubbed his face, still stunned by the unfamiliar warmth in his chest. "I think I forgot what that felt like," he said, laughing like I meant it. The mansion on Aspen Ridge no longer echoed with emptiness. It began to breathe. The courtroom did not look the way Ellie imagined. It was too clean, too bright, too large for voices as small as hers. The ceiling stretched high above her head. The walls carried the weight of silence that seemed sharper than any storm. She sat at the petitioner's table beside Graham, her feet barely brushing the floor. Macy slept in her carrier, a tiny fist curled beneath her chin. Graham's shoulders were squared in his tailored suit, but Ellie noticed the way his jaw tightened, how his hands rested flat on the table like he needed to anchor himself. Across the aisle, Monica entered as if the room belonged to her. Dressed in sleek black, her pearl earrings glinted under the lights, her expression cold and theatrical. She did not glance at Ellie, not even once. Her attorney carried a thick binder marked with red tabs, his voice smooth and dismissive as he spoke of Monica as a grieving widow simply trying to reunite with the children she loved. His words dripped with politeness, but Ellie felt them like knives. Mellon, their attorney, stood tall beside Graham. Her voice was clear, cutting through the performance. She did not embellish. She did not need to. She spoke of 2 children abandoned in a snowstorm, discarded without shelter, left with nothing but each other. She promised proof, and when the witnesses stepped forward, the truth began to crack through the lies. An elderly neighbor with weary eyes told the court what he had heard through his open window that night. The words Monica had screamed, the slam of the door. His voice wavered with age, but the weight of his memory silenced the room. Then came the footage. A doorbell camera showing Ellie carrying Macy, boots heavy with snow, as Monica's figure stood framed in the doorway, shouting for them to leave. Monica's face drained of color as the judge leaned forward. The tension in the room was unbearable. Ellie's heart raced, but when she looked at Graham, he did not waver. He met her eyes calmly, as if to tell her she did not need to carry this alone anymore. When the judge called Monica's actions what they were, abandonment, endangerment, and lies, the sound of the gavel seemed to echo louder than the storm that had driven her from that house. Officers stepped forward, cuffing Monica as she raged and shouted. No one moved to defend her. No one believed her. For the first time, Ellie saw her powerless, and the weight she had carried for months began to fall away. When the judge asked Ellie if she wanted to live with Mr. Walker, her throat tightened. She looked at him, waiting for a signal, but he gave her none. He only watched her, steady and quiet, the way someone does when they are prepared to honor your truth. Ellie's voice was soft but clear. He is the first person who ever asked if I was okay and meant it. The judge nodded once, her expression shifting. Guardianship was granted. Macy would stay with her sister. The world outside still lay under snow, but something had shifted inside them. Graham bent down to Ellie's level, his voice almost a whisper. It is not over yet, but it is beginning. Ellie nodded, and for the first time she stepped into his embrace, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Months passed and seasons began to change. Macy's first birthday arrived with the first hints of spring. The house, once a monument to loneliness, had been transformed into a home. Balloons hung unevenly in the dining room, a crooked cake leaned gently to one side, and laughter filled the air as Ellie held her sister close. Graham snapped a photo, capturing something he never thought he would see again, himself smiling, not out of politeness, but out of joy. Later, as the girls played, Ellie's voice wavered with uncertainty. She spoke of overhearing him on the phone, wondering about foster placements. Fear had lodged in her chest, convinced he was planning to send them away. Graham felt the shame rise like a tide, but he admitted the truth. He had been afraid he was not enough, not capable, not the man they deserved. But then he told her what he had come to realize. He did not want a life without them. He could not imagine it. Her eyes searched his face. "So what are we to you?" she asked. Graham lowered himself to meet her gaze, his voice breaking as he answered. "You are not guests. You are not a burden. You are family. You are mine, and if you will let me, I want to be your dad, not for now, forever." Ellie's arms wrapped around him in silence, but the weight of that embrace struck deeper than any words. The girl who had once stood shivering in the snow now clung to him with trust, and he held her with a promise he would never break. Weeks later, the adoption papers were signed. Ellie Grace Walker and Macy Ray Walker. Words printed on a page, yet they felt sacred, heavier than any contract he had ever touched. He traced their names with his fingers, the ink still fresh, knowing they were not just legalities but bonds no one could undo. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now resonated with laughter, with soft footsteps racing down hallways, with crayon drawings taped to walls. Graham stepped onto the porch one morning with coffee in hand, watching Ellie spin Macy around in the yard, both of them tangled in sunlight and laughter. The world seemed brighter, warmer, alive. Ellie handed him a drawing one evening. 3 figures hand in hand beneath a yellow sun, a house behind them, smoke curling from the chimney. At the top, in bold red letters, the words, "You open the door." Graham's throat tightened as he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. He realized she was right. He had opened the door that night, but it was not just for them. It was for himself. For years, Graham Walker had lived inside walls built to keep the world out. But on the coldest night of winter, a knock on his door reminded him that some walls are not meant to last. Love had walked in, carrying a baby in her arms and fear in her eyes, and it had turned his silence into a home. He was not alone anymore. None of them were. There are stories that live quietly in the corners of our world, hidden in the spaces where pain and hope meet. This was one of them. On the coldest night of winter, a little girl knocked on a door with nothing but courage in her trembling voice and a newborn clutched in her arms. She was not asking for riches, not even a future, only one night of safety. What she found was more than shelter. What she found was a beginning. For Graham Walker, that night shattered years of silence. He had built walls high and thick enough to keep anyone from touching the hollow parts of his life. He believed solitude was survival, that shutting the world out was safer than letting it close. But when Ellie and Macy stepped into his home, something deeper began to stir. He rediscovered laughter in the lines of a crayon drawing, warmth in the hum of a lullaby, and belonging in the smallest hand curled around his. The fortress he had built was no longer a prison. It became a place of life. This was not an easy road. Illness, fear, and the shadow of abandonment threatened to break them apart. There were nights when the storm outside mirrored the storm inside, when choices felt heavy and impossible. Yet again and again the same truth emerged. Love is not about perfection. It is about showing up. Graham did not promise luxury. He promised safety. He promised presence. And when he stood in a courtroom, facing down lies and betrayal, he promised something even greater, that no one would ever split them apart again. Ellie, once a child forced to carry burdens too heavy for her age, found her voice again. She learned that not every door closes, that not every adult looks away. She discovered what it feels like to be chosen, not out of pity but out of love. Macy, still too young to understand the battles fought for her, grew in a home where her laughter filled the air instead of cries echoing unanswered. Together, the three of them became something none of them expected. They became a family. And maybe that is the message hidden in this story. That family is not only the people we are born to, but the ones who step forward when we have nowhere left to go. That sometimes the most powerful act is opening a door and refusing to close it again. That hope can survive the coldest storms if someone chooses to carry it. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that love, kindness, and second chances are still alive in this world. Here at Hidden Echo Stories, we believe that behind every shadow is a light waiting to be seen, and behind every silence is a voice waiting to be heard. Subscribe now, stay with us, and be part of a place where stories of healing, hope, and humanity are never forgotten. Because the next story might just be the one your heart has been waiting for.